Welcome, everyone, to the World Affairs Council of Connecticut's annual Global Security Forum, as we explore competing for the future. We are very privileged today to kick off GSF 2021 with this extraordinary event. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge our chairman, Mr. Peter Kelly, who made this event happen. Today, we have with us, we welcome to the World Affairs Council Senator Richard Burr from North Carolina and Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Welcome, senators.
Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
So as the United States closes the chapter on 20 years of war, the country is more divided than ever. China is rapidly ascending, and the US standing and perception in the world is ever changing. This year's theme of Global Security Forum explores all of those issues. So while we were focused on 20 years of war, our near-peer competitors have advanced rapidly, including China. So my opening question to you, and I'll let you start, Senator Burr. When thinking of the theme, competing for the future, and the US leadership role in the world, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest threats that we're facing at home and abroad?
Well, let me say that competing for the future is not only what we've looked at in the past, which is economic dominance or economic influence, but it's security here and abroad. It's for ourselves, it's for our partners around the world. And as China continues to grow in their economy, they also continue to grow in their use of technology and their ability to innovate. And I think what America needs to focus on, and quite frankly, what our partners around the world need to focus on, is how we get back into leading the global surge in innovation and new technology. America is very slow at the deployment of that innovation. And that's where our competition has caught up to us, and in some cases passed us, because they don't have the restrictions that they go through that we have in this country for the deployment of that technology. So in a way, COVID has been a blessing to us, because we proved that we could put our foot on the gas along with Europeans. We could create a vaccine, we could manufacture it, we could deploy it, and we could do it seamlessly. We've got to do that in every other sector of our economy, and we've got to apply that to our national security in the future and with our partners around the world.
Senator Warner?
Well, Megan, first of all, thank you. And I want to give a shout out to my dear friend, Peter Kelly, for his leadership of the World Affairs Council. And I want to thank my friend, Richard Burr, for joining me in this presentation. I agree with Senator Burr. I think over the last, almost post-Sputnik, most all innovation and technology in this country, in the world, if not invented here, we got to set the rules, the procedures, the protocols, and the standards. And consequently, we maintain both an innovation lead and then a rollout in many ways of that innovation. Over the last 20 years, as you've noted, as our country focused a lot on the Middle East and the threat of counter-terrorists, we, I think, took our eye off the ball in terms of near-peer adversaries like Russia and China. I think in many ways, I want to give credit to Richard when he was chair of the Intelligence Committee. I'm not chair, but we on the Intelligence Committee started looking at this issue, I think, ahead of the game. We, from the intelligence standpoint, we see all of these emerging technologies, we see the threats, and we saw the evolution of China. And when we talk about China, I think we always try to make clear our beef is with the Communist Party of China and Xi Jinping and his leadership. It's not with the Chinese people or the Chinese diaspora here in America or around the world. But China really was investing at levels that we used to invest in terms of new technology development. They do, as Senator Burr indicated, don't have the same constraints on them that we do, but they also were starting to flood the zone on these technology setting bodies. My background was in telecom, and our committee was really the first to look at the development of how 5G and 5G wireless networks are where all the Internet of Things are going to ride. Suddenly we had a Chinese competitor in Huawei starting to dominate the market, dominate the standards, and the West and America were caught off guard. And I think the conventional wisdom around China, which I was part of back at the beginning of this century, 20 years ago, which, the more you bring China into the WTO, the more you bring China into the world order, the closer they're going to get to us writ large democracies. That was just wrong. China is a great nation, a great power. We've never had this level of economic competition before, but they are practicing a form of authoritarian capitalism where they back their national champions in a way that creates a surveillance state using this technology that they export that kind of surveillance state as much as they export technology. That means we have to rethink the challenges around China. We have to rethink how we think about investment in next generation technologies. The Senate took a major step forward on this in a big bipartisan bill this past summer around investments in semiconductors and 5G. We're probably going to have to do more of that. But it's an area, again, I think that Senator Burr and I have spent a lot of time thinking about and thinking through on the Intelligence Committee.
I have a question for both of you about how our domestic situation impacts our standing in the world. So how concerned are both of you about how the US is perceived abroad when the world sees incidents like January 6th, when the world sees how fiercely divided we are domestically? How does that impact how we're able to compete for the future? Who wants to take that one?
Go ahead, Mark.
January 6th was a disaster. I thought about not only the terror that went through the Capitol Police and our staffs. Senator Burr and I were together that day, and the kind of secret holding room that was not so secret. But the thing that struck me was as those images of those thugs on the floor of the Capitol were being beamed around the world, particularly Vladimir Putin, there was no better propaganda gift that we've ever given. So I think those images are devastating. And obviously we are, before the broadcast started, Senator Burr and I were talking about the fact that, we've got a series of crises coming up very shortly. Some of them self-imposed, frankly, by my team, the Democrats, in terms of, how we're going to keep the government funded, how we're not going to go ahead and violate the debt ceiling. There are some self-inflicted challenges around our infrastructure bill and the so-called bigger social spending bill. Those are all concerns to me. I'm concerned about how the administration executed the circumstances with France vis-a-vis the Australia, UK, America National Security Pact, which was in Australia's best interest, but our execution was obviously not as good as it should have been. The only caveat I would put is that it seems to become an incredible focus. We talk about how divided we all are all the time. I would point out whether it was the China bill or whether it was the infrastructure bill. I mean, these are bills, at least in the Senate, that got broad bipartisan support. And while we don't get as much attention as we used to when we were doing the Russia investigation, I mean, there are committees like ours, the Intelligence Committee, that still function in a broadly bipartisan way. So yes, there are some problems. Maybe we should be able to try to emphasize a little more. We're still getting along.
Yeah, I'd remind everybody who's attending your event, there's nobody in the world, no other government trying to replicate the United States Senate. They look at us and they say, this is the most dysfunctional by architecture body of legislature in the world. But it works. And Mark and I are confident that even though we go through difficult times, that on the other end of this, we come out that much stronger. Now, I think it's appropriate, it's early in your program, to go ahead and throw a hand grenade. Social media is a good thing, and social media has proven to be a very aggravating and dangerous thing. And I think social media contributed greatly to what happened on November the 6th. We've got to figure out from a policy standpoint how to go forward where we get the good out of it, but we limit the bad. And I think that social media has done more to rip or tear the social fabric in this country. It's given people the belief that they can say things that never affect themselves or others, that absolutely tear other people apart and without retribution. My hope is that in a bipartisan way, we will at some point, this is not for a regulator to determine. This is for legislators to get in and say, what are we going to live with and what are we going to ban possibly?
So thank you. So Senator Warner touched on this, and it's sort of our traditional alliances. So as the world is changing, as you said, our competition geographically has changed. Are our traditional alliances like NATO still relevant? Do you think we really need to pivot to more Five Eyes, to looking at the Quad? What is the future of alliances?
Well, alliances are important. And I think Mark and I deal most of our day in a different world where our relationships with people that publicly we might be in a difficult time with. At least the world we're in, the partnership is as close and workable as it's ever been. So we might have a different perspective than other members who might be on foreign relations or something like that. But there's no substitute for what Five Eyes provides the United States and our partners. Mark and I can remember the day we said, why don't we take 5G and let this be a Five Eyes issue where we commingle the great innovation of all the countries and we come up with a solution to Huawei. We're still not able to get that through to an administration, but we'll continue to try because I think Five Eyes is a partnership that we shouldn't limit just to security.
And I would, let me just add on that, and I'll be, even though it's my team in the administration at this point, I think one of the things that the rest of the world was looking for was kind of a return to traditional strength and alliances. And I think the first 6 months of the Biden administration, they did a good job. I think the exit from Afghanistan and now the recent I think failure to execute in terms of notifying our allies with France are problematic because I think the world wants a strong America. I think when President Trump kind of took us out of a lot of the alliances, you saw the rest of the world drift. I think the world needs, or at least democracies around, need a strong America. And I think NATO, Five Eyes is extraordinarily close. I think NATO is still very, very important. And echoing what Senator Burr just said, while there may be a rift at the political level, it's that rift, at least at this point, is not crept into the defense relationships or the intel relationships. I also think we need to, one of the things we've thought about on the Intel Committee is, if you look historically post-World War II, we started with military alliances, and then there were economic alliances. We thought about the beginnings of the European Common Market and the series of economic alliances that, frankly, I think we should have done TPP back under President Obama. But I think there is as we think about more and more of this competition now, being in the development of technology and technology that's based in values like transparency and human rights, I think the age of what we're entering into now is we need technology-based alliances, an alliance of democracies around technology that can take on, for example, as Richard said, social media. There are good things about social media, but social media can be a huge fountain of misinformation and disinformation. Social media and these tools can be used to surveil a country, as China uses, whether through TikTok or other tools they've got in their technology companies. So can we have this alliance of the willing around technology development? And that may be around things like semiconductors. It may be around issues like 5G. It may be as we think about artificial intelligence, quantum computing. Senator Burr has taken a major lead in life sciences. I think, again, we're going to need strong American leadership that can be not just for America, but around these alliances against the more authoritarian regimes.
Let me throw in just a quick question. Do either of you have concern, or what about working with alliances around space and space technology and space threats?
Well, I might start with that. I think we, again, on the intel side of the house, we are working much closer with our allies on space. We're working much closer with around commercial space. We cannot meet all of our needs of our intel, particularly at least the intel side, with government only. We've got to use our commercial partners. And, and I think as we've seen, all of these companies, the Elon Musks of the world and Jeff Bezos of the world and Bransom's of the world come out. I mean, the space domain is changing as much as any around. And I think there are great opportunities around space collaboration.
Yeah, 20 years ago, I would have picked space as the last place where competition would influence what our domestic policy internally looked like. And it's probably been one of the biggest motivators of anything. The Elon Musk and Bransons and Bezos have done things that we were told weren't possible. And it's really changed from a policymaker standpoint, what we're requiring of the agencies that we authorize and that we appropriate with the benchmarks that they need to hit. But listen, space is a great example where slow technology deployment means you lose. And we've got to change where we are in that order.
So another area, another domain is the cyber domain. And so a question from Art House, one of the issues all countries care about, and increasingly with more urgency every day, is defense against cyber attacks, especially ransomware. The US has demonstrated its offensive capabilities in the cyber world, but it doesn't necessarily appear to position itself to help other countries defend themselves against cyber penetration. Do you see that as being a new priority? And if so, how would we go about that?
Well, let me start on that one. I mean, just one of the things we don't have is we don't have any kind of international cyber standards. I know, for example, Microsoft has proposed that, just as we have kind of international rules of war, which are not always followed, that you don't bomb, you don't bomb hospitals. Perhaps you need some level of cyber rules of conflict that say you don't take down a healthcare system, you don't shut down a critical piece of infrastructure, and if a foreign entity does, and too often, particularly coming out of Russia, there are you don't know whether these are cyber criminals or parts of the Russian spy operations. They may be spies by day and criminals at night. If you had some level of international standards, you might then have lower attribution requirements in terms of there being consequences. There has to be consequences to bad actors, cyber criminals, or nation states who perform these activities. One of the things that Senator Burr and I are working on, and I think we're going to see it take place, and this needs to take place not only in America, but around the world. We don't even have a minimum standard for cyber reporting at this point. Thank goodness in the case of SolarWinds, where 18,000 companies were penetrated, the entity voluntarily reported that to the government. But if they had not, if Kevin Mandia from the third-party defender there had not reported to the government, we might have gone months more without even knowing that penetration had taken place. That was Russia, and luckily again, it was only an exfiltration of information. But if the SolarWinds inside 18,000 companies had been a denial of service attack or shutting down all those 18,000 companies' functions, we would have ground our economy to a halt. So we at least need to make sure that we are notified. And I was with the EU commissioner on these issues yesterday, and Europe is going through a very similar debate about incident notification. So I think this is an area that's ripe for international collaboration.
Let me just say that what we don't know, we don't know. And we think that these are data-related exfiltrations, but we don't know what else they got. So that ought to tell us we ought to be extremely concerned about it. I hear what Mark said about setting rules, and I think he and I both agree. The ones that we're most concerned with, even if we set the rules, they're not going to play by them. Mm-hmm. So let me just say, it requires a different level of offensive will. And it would be much better if we had partners around the world that were in that with us.
So American leadership requires effective intelligence collection and analysis. I mean, you both have great experience overseeing the intelligence community and influence on how we're able to compete for the future. As we just passed the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we're also reminded that the reforms envisioned for the intelligence community have only partially been realized. Right, and we know that over the last several years, we've had more than 3 directors of the CIA. So what do you think we need to realize fully the potential of the intelligence community as foreseen in post 9/11 to ensure collaboration, integration of work in progress facing our future?
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Well, well, listen, there's no one. One, I'm very proud of how our committee, and a lot of this is due to Richard's leadership, when he was chair, has maintained that oversight over the IC. We have their back. There have been mistakes made since 9/11, but I do think there is much better integration than there was before 9/11. We still have bumps, particularly as we've kind of tried to move. One of the things we both worked on is how we move our technology acquisition and development much quicker. Space is a prime example. And again, under Senator Burr's leadership, we've moved a lot in terms of NRO and NGA moving much quicker. We always have the challenges of when we go back to cyber for a moment. We've set up all of these operations appropriately to protect the privacy of Americans, to kind of go after the bad guys abroad. Our best assets are NSA and Cybercom. But what the bad guys have started to do is, rather than launching attacks from abroad where our top team can go after them, they're starting to launch attacks from domestic servers. So how we appropriately protect Americans' privacy, but also bring our A team to the table is still a challenge. And one kind of very much in the weeds nerdy thing, but is something that we still got to realize, and Senator Burr and I have worked on this a lot, is we need to recruit the best and the brightest to be in the intelligence community. And when it takes a year to 2 years to get your security clearance, that's crazy. We had at one point, and this is an area where President Trump actually did a very good job. We had a 750,000 person backlog in security clearances. We've cut that by 2/3, but we still need to do a better job of having Americans' ability to serve in the IC, and it may be for part of their career, not their whole career, but so we've got work to do, but I do think we've made an enormous amount of progress since 9/11.
Listen, I'm one of 3 members of Congress who served on the Intelligence Committee on 9/11 and still serves on the Intelligence Committee today. So I've lived through the 20 years. I remember very vividly the recommendations of the commission. It was made 19 years ago. Many of those recommendations have been addressed, even though you couldn't point to them and say, here's a change, because we created the Director of National Intelligence. And many of those things have been actions that we've taken in authorization bills, and worked hand in hand with the community to change certain things that we thought enhanced our ability to keep the country safe and to do the job. The one thing I will always hang my hat on is that the Intelligence Committee, at least in the Senate, has never become partisan. It has always remained focused on its oversight role as the single most important thing that we do. And because of that, I look at us as the 18th intelligence community agency under the umbrella. We're a partner with everybody else. It's just we have a different responsibility, and we carry it out in partnership with the agencies.
So I know we're running out of time, and I'm going to let each of you offer some concluding thoughts. As our audience is preparing for this whole week of looking at how the United States is able to compete for the future, what are the bits of advice, maybe the top few things that you want the audience to know about how the U.S. can compete for the future? Senator Burr?
Well, I think our biggest challenge is that we've got to learn to skate to where the puck's going to be and not to where it is today. The shelf life of technology today is somewhere between 18 and 24 months. Yet we spend 2 years just designing a satellite, 3 years building it, and another year launching it with an expectation that it has an 8-year life in space. Totally ridiculous, because we're not taking advantage of what technology provides us. Listen, I think we're going to see a lot of changes. And I think COVID has, in a weird way, forced us to look at things that we wouldn't have looked at before. I think the biggest challenge before the United States and some of our partners around the world is this realignment of supply chain. It's directly impacted by COVID, but it gets into national security, it gets into economic independence. And that's something that's much more difficult to deal with, but we're gonna have to deal with it if in fact we want to look the American people in the face and say we're prepared for not only pandemics in the future, but we can supply the chips that we need for automobiles or for military hardware. We can provide the types of reserves that we feel comfortable with without a reliance on people who spend most of their day trying to figure out how to defeat us.
Well, Megan, let me build off that. And again, thanks for this opportunity, and thanks to my friend Senator Burr for participating with me in this forum. I think we got to lead with our values. Our values have always been about transparency, democracy, human rights. I think all of those values are under assault. I think sometimes exacerbated in the world, as Richard indicated, in social media, where truth and science are under constant assault. How we sort that through is going to take actions in America, but also actions with our partners around the world. Number one, and some of it is around reforming on social media. Some of it is just kind of revalidating science. I mean, I would have never expected in a country like ours that where, as Senator Burr indicated, because of American European ingenuity, we ended up with the vaccine, and then we still got a quarter of American population not taking the vaccine. That is mind blowing in my mind. So we have to sort through some of that. We also have to realize we've never faced a competitor like China. The Soviet Union was a military threat and an ideological threat. It was never an economic threat. And the Chinese authoritarian capitalism model, where they allow ferocious domestic competition inside China until a Chinese national champion emerges, and that Chinese national champion then gets huge support from the state and all of the tentacles of the CCP. That's a problem. And all of these Chinese companies, read the Chinese law itself. It says their top responsibility is not to their shareholders, but to the Communist Party of China. So rethinking that economic juggernaut and how we take it on pushes us into a whole host of supply chain issues that now fall into the national security domain. And we have to realize as well that this is going to require a level of investment, probably from the public sector, that some of us are sometimes uncomfortable with. We were putting up $52 billion on semiconductors. That's a lot of money, but it pales in comparison to what China or Taiwan or even South Korea is putting up. So how do we find ways to compete, both America-wise, but I also think in concert with our allies? And I think about the technology alliance NATO version that would not only include NATO, but would probably include Taiwan and South Korea and Japan and Australia and hopefully India and Israel. But I think America will come through this. Again, I think Senator Burr made an interesting comment. We all talk about the dysfunction of our political process, but the founders set up a process that was structured to be slightly dysfunctional. Everybody had to agree. The House was independent from the Senate and independent from the president. We're seeing a little bit more of that dysfunction right now than we're probably all comfortable with. But I think we will get through this and come out stronger. But that American leadership role, particularly with like-minded democracies and the vast majority of the people around the world who I think aspire to live in democracies, we really have got to step up, and we can't retreat at this critical moment in time.
Senators Warner and Senator Burr, thank you so much for joining us today in sharing your expertise. It has been the perfect start to Global Security Forum, touching on all of the issues that we're going to explore. And I can't thank you enough for being with us today.
Thank you.
Clyde, thank you.
Thank you.